The words are all gone.
A little boy crouched alone in a corner of the bustling children's reading room at the city library, clutching a book of architectural drawings tightly in his hands. He held the pages almost to the tip of his nose, but his old glasses with a nose pad wrapped in medical tape and lenses covered in scratches couldn't help him at all. He didn't cry or fuss. He merely let out a sigh so soft it was almost inaudible, tinged with a resigned calm. On the other side of the bookshelf, billionaire Marcus Sterling heard that whisper. The helplessness, so childlike yet so prematurely mature, made him freeze in his tracks just as he was about to step into the spotlight. Moments later, he would discover the astonishing truth about this little boy and the great aunt who worked tirelessly in the late-night laundry room just to keep him safe. And this would forever change the life of this cold-hearted tycoon. This is a fictional story intended to share meaningful life lessons.
What did you just say?
I stopped in my tracks and whispered to Sarah, the librarian standing beside me, across 2 rows of towering mahogany bookshelves. Sarah followed my gaze. In that corner, shielded from the commotion, the little boy in the faded coat was still crouched on the floor. He didn't answer me because he hadn't heard a word. I watched as he struggled to wedge a tiny folded piece of paper into the hinge of his scratched-up glasses. The frames, wrapped in medical tape, looked precarious, as if they might fall apart at any moment.
His name is Leo,
Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with a resignation born of witnessing suffering yet still unable to grow immune to it. I waved my hand to cut off the PR assistant who was about to come up and urge me to go downstairs to give my speech.
Tell him to wait.
I said without turning around. The assistant froze, her face betraying the kind of fear unique to dealing with a capricious boss.
But Mr. Sterling, there are 30 media outlets downstairs waiting for you to announce the community sponsorship program.
I said have them wait.
I emphasized. I turned back to Sarah and gestured for her to continue.
Leo's eyesight has deteriorated significantly,
Sarah said, her gaze softening as she looked toward the corner.
but he never complains. He's afraid of being a burden to his great aunt Alara.
I furrowed my brow slightly.
What about his parents?
I asked.
A car accident 3 years ago.
Sarah said softly. 3 years ago. That timeline felt like a fine needle piercing precisely into some hidden corner of my chest. 3 years ago was also the year I signed the divorce papers, moved out of that house for good, and had Julian scream hysterically at me over the phone.
I never want to see you again.
Ella gave up her retirement to raise him.
Sarah continued.
She works the night shift at an industrial laundry now, 10 at night until 6 in the morning.
I watched as Leo picked up the thick architectural portfolio again, holding it almost right up to his nose.
Doesn't the city have a free vision assistance program?
I asked. As someone who signs checks for millions of dollars at charity galas every year, I knew how the system worked. Sarah gave a wry smile.
There is, but you have to submit an application through an online portal.
She paused, as if weighing how to explain the muddy reality of the ground to someone like me, who lived in the clouds.
Mr. Sterling, Alara doesn't have a computer. She doesn't even know how to use a smartphone. Last week, she came here with a stack of paper tax documents, hoping I could scan and upload them for her. But the system requires SMS 2-factor authentication and an email address. She has neither. For a 68-year-old, that website is like a wall of size.
I fell silent. My tech company had just spent $20 million optimizing the user interface, so customers could complete payments half a second faster. Yet, in this corner of the city, an elderly woman couldn't get her grandson a new pair of glasses to see the world clearly simply because she didn't have an email address.
Just half an hour ago, the community welfare caseworker called her.
Sarah sighed softly.
The application was denied because they were missing a supplementary statement in PDF format.
Just then, a man wearing a cheap but impeccably pressed gray suit walked into the reading room. He held a tablet in his hand, his gaze sweeping over the crowd with a condescending air.
That's Greg.
Sarah whispered.
He's the welfare caseworker.
Greg headed straight for the corner where Leo was sitting.
The Hayes kid.
Greg said quietly, but with undisguised sarcasm. Leo looked up, squinting to make out the man's face.
Your grandma still hasn't submitted the missing documents.
Greg tapped the edge of the bookshelf with his tablet.
I told her the system doesn't recognize tiers-only data. By constantly tying up back-end review resources like this, you're being irresponsible toward other high-quality community members.
Leo stood up, clutching the architectural portfolio tightly in both hands.
I'm sorry, sir.
Leo's voice was soft but unusually calm.
Grandma will try again after she gets off work. Please don't revoke our eligibility.
That sense of resignation, so uncharacteristic of an 8-year-old, struck me once again. Greg snorted derisively.
That's the underlying logic survival of the fittest. You don't even possess the most basic digital survival skills. Being weeded out is a natural law.
He turned around, preparing to leave. I stood in the shadow of the mahogany bookshelf, watching this low-level bureaucrat spouting internet jargon. My fingers slowly tightened at my sides.
Mr. Sterling,
The assistant approached cautiously once more.
the mayor has arrived.
I took a deep breath, pulling my gaze away from Leo's precariously perched glasses.
Let's go.
I said quietly, but I knew that something had been irrevocably changed this afternoon. Chapter 2. The spotlight on the podium stung my eyes. I looked out at the suits and politicians below and the reporters with their cameras and microphones, mechanically reading the script prepared by the PR department.
The Sterling Group has always been committed to giving back to the community, building a ladder of opportunity for the underprivileged.
Every word was absolutely correct. Every word was utterly hollow. What I couldn't shake from my mind was that tiny gesture, Leo slipping a piece of paper into the hinge of the picture frame. It was all the resistance a child could muster when facing a vast and indifferent world. 15 minutes later, I finished my speech. I brushed aside the mayor who tried to come up for a photo, and I brushed aside the investor holding a glass of champagne.
Cancel all my appointments for this afternoon.
I told the assistant following behind me.
But we have a meeting with the East District Development Committee this afternoon.
Cancel it.
I didn't turn around. I took off my expensive custom-made suit jacket and tossed it into the assistant's arms. Wearing only a dark shirt without any logos, I walked back into the library. There were fewer people in the reading room. Leo was still sitting in that corner. The architectural portfolio lay open on the floor in front of him, but he wasn't looking at it. Instead, he sat with his arms wrapped around his knees, lost in thought. I slowed my pace, walked over to him, and slowly crouched down.
What are you looking at?
I asked softly. Leo turned his head, squinting at me for a moment before he could make out my silhouette.
Gothic architecture.
He said, pointing to the book on the floor.
But I can't make out the details of the flying buttresses.
There was no complaint in his tone, only a calm acceptance of fact. I pulled something out of my pocket and held it out to him. It was an exquisitely crafted brass magnifying glass. I'd bought it yesterday at an antique shop, originally intending to place it on my empty desk as a decoration.
A good architect needs to see the details clearly before drawing.
I said. Leo froze for a moment. He hesitantly reached out and took the heavy magnifying glass. He held it up to his eyes and focused it on the sketchbook on the floor. In an instant, his eyes widened. It was the first time that afternoon he'd shown the lively expression of an 8-year-old.
I can see it clearly.
He whispered in amazement.
The carvings here are shaped like roses, and look at these load-bearing columns.
I decided to sit down on the floor and look at them with him.
Do you know what flying buttresses are for?
I asked him.
They're to support the main walls, so the church can be built taller and fit bigger stained glass windows.
Leo answered without hesitation. I watched his focused profile.
Do you really like architecture?
Yeah,
Leo nodded.
I want to build a really big house. That way, Grandma won't have to wash those heavy sheets every night.
Something seemed to catch in my throat. I've built the tallest skyscrapers in this city, but in the buildings I've created, there's never been a wish this pure. Just then, my private phone in my pocket vibrated. It was the ringtone I'd set specifically for my son Julian. I answered immediately.
Julian.
I tried to make my voice sound as gentle as possible.
My credit card's been blocked.
The voice on the other end had the characteristic indifference of a 15-year-old.
I know, I did it. I want to talk to you. Are you free this weekend? We could go.
I'm not free.
He cut me off without hesitation.
Unfreeze the card. There's nothing to talk about between us besides money.
Julian, I'm your father.
You were nothing more than an ATM when you moved out of that house 3 years ago.
The call was hung up. The busy tone echoed in my ears like a rusty, dull knife. I sat on the cold library floor, clutching my phone, feeling like a deflated sack of skin.
Sir, are you okay?
Leo set down his magnifying glass, his eyes, which looked somewhat vacant due to his astigmatism, gazing at me with concern. I looked at this kid who couldn't even afford glasses, yet still cared about a stranger.
I'm fine.
I shoved my phone back into my pocket and forced a smile.
Let's get back to the blueprints.
Okay.
Leo picked up his magnifying glass again.
Actually, the hardest part of building a house isn't how tall you make it.
He said suddenly. I looked at him.
Then what is it?
It's laying the foundation.
Leo said earnestly.
Grandma used to say that if the foundation isn't solid, a single gust of wind will blow it away.
I stared at him for a long time.
Your grandmother is a very wise woman.
I said, Chapter 3. Over the next 3 days, I tapped into some personal connections I rarely use. I didn't write Ella a check outright. Sarah told me that old lady had a pride of steel. If I showed up acting like I was doing her a favor, she wouldn't hesitate to throw the money in my face. So I had my personal health advisor contact the best eye clinic in town. On Thursday afternoon, a poster coincidentally appeared on the community library's bulletin board. Exclusive to this community, free vision screening and eyeglass fitting charity event. No complicated online applications, no email required, just show your library card. I sat in a black sedan parked across the street from the library, watching through the privacy-tinted windows as Alara led Leo up the steps. Alara wore a deep blue coat faded from repeated washings and held her back straight. She walked slowly, as if weighing with every step whether this free offer would compromise her dignity. I watched them go inside and felt a slight sense of relief, but that relief didn't last long. 10 minutes later, I saw Greg walk into the library. He was still wearing that cheap gray suit, clutching the tablet that seemed to be an extension of his own body. I opened the car door and got out. I hadn't brought a bodyguard and was still wearing that unmarked dark shirt. As I entered the reading room, Greg was standing between Alara and the makeshift vision screening station.
Miss Hayes, I believe I made myself quite clear earlier.
Greg's voice carried a sickeningly official tone.
Your online eligibility screening was not approved. This public service event is reserved for high-quality residents registered in the system.
Alara clutched Leo's hand tightly.
The poster said all we needed was a library card.
She said, her voice trembling slightly but still maintaining her composure.
The poster is for those who know how to follow the rules.
Greg said, tapping his tablet impatiently.
People like you, who are used to taking without making the effort to adapt to the digital system, only drag down the efficiency of the entire community. Please leave. Don't waste the doctor's time here.
Leo shrank back behind Alara. I stood outside the 2 rows of bookshelves watching the scene coldly. I saw the ophthalmologist look awkward, trying to interject only to be silenced by Greg's invocation of community regulations. I couldn't step out now. If I stepped forward as the CEO of Sterling Group, I could certainly crush this clown instantly. But that would also shatter, in full view of everyone, the self-respect Alara had struggled so hard to maintain. She would become the object of a billionaire's pity. I took out my phone and dialed the clinic director's number.
This is Marcus Sterling.
I lowered my voice, but my tone left no room for doubt.
Have your staff begin the eye exam on that boy named Leo right now, immediately. If that idiot in the gray suit dares to interfere again, tell him I'll triple this clinic's rent next year.
30 seconds later, the ophthalmologist in the examination room received a call. The doctor's expression changed. He hung up the phone, walked right past Greg, and approached Alara.
Miss Hayes, please bring Leo over. We'll start right away.
The doctor said respectfully. Greg froze.
Wait, they don't meet the...
That's the clinic's decision, sir.
The doctor cut him off coldly.
If you have any objections, you can file a complaint with our investors.
Greg's face alternated between pale and crimson. He glared fiercely at Alara, then turned and stormed off. As he passed the bookshelf where I was hiding, he glanced at me. He had clearly recognized me as the penniless old man who had sat on the floor reading with Leo that day.
What are you looking at, you low-life trash?
He muttered under his breath and strode out the door. I watched his retreating figure, my gaze turning completely cold. Half an hour later, Leo was wearing a brand new pair of black-framed glasses. He stood in front of the mirror, looking left and right. Then he turned around and looked at Alara.
Grandma, I can see the wrinkles on your face now.
He said with a smile. Ayla's eyes welled up with tears and she gently patted Leo on the head.
Silly boy.
For the next 2 months, every Thursday afternoon, I showed up at the library without fail. I turned down countless executive meetings, leaving decisions worth hundreds of millions to my deputies. Dressed in plain clothes, I sat in that corner, teaching Leo to read complex architectural blueprints. Leo, wearing his new glasses, would sketch the house of his dreams onto the blueprints. It was the moment he looked forward to most each week. It was also the only moment each week when I felt truly alive. Until that late winter evening. Chapter 4. The late winter wind carried a bone-chilling cold, whipping up the fallen leaves on the street. I stood in front of a dilapidated apartment building whose exterior had been scrubbed spotless. This was Alara and Leo's home. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Alara answered the door. When she saw me, a flicker of surprise crossed her eyes, but she quickly regained her calm vigilance.
Mr. Sterling.
She said softly. She knew my name. Sarah had told her that the man who accompanied Leo to his art lessons every Thursday was named Marcus, but she didn't know the financial empire behind that name.
Excuse me for disturbing you.
I said, bowing slightly. Alara stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was small, the furniture worn, but everything was arranged with meticulous order. The air was thick with the scent of cheap detergent mixed with instant coffee. Leo was doing his homework in the bedroom. Alara poured me a cup of instant coffee and set it on the dining table, which was covered with a plastic tablecloth.
I know you arranged the eye doctor.
She didn't beat around the bush, looking me straight in the eye. I held the rough ceramic cup and didn't deny it.
I'm grateful to you.
Alara said, her back straight as a board.
But we don't need charity. I'll pay you back for those glasses in installments, $50 a month. Is that okay?
I looked at this elderly woman who had poured her heart and soul into the late-night laundromat. Her backbone was sturdier than that of any Wall Street tycoon I'd ever met.
You've misunderstood.
I said softly.
I'm not giving charity, Leo is teaching me.
Alara frowned slightly.
Teaching you what?
Teaching me how to be a father again.
I gave a wry smile, confessing the secret that kept me awake at night.
I have a 15-year-old son. He hasn't called me dad in 3 years. I can build skyscrapers, but I can't build a home.
The wariness in Alara's eyes slowly faded. She looked at me as if I were a lost traveler. Just then, a series of violent thuds came from the door.
Open up, listen up. Whoever's inside, open the door right now.
Alara stood up and walked toward the door. The door had barely opened halfway when it was violently shoved open. Greg burst in with 2 men wearing construction crew vests. He was still wearing that gray suit, but now his face bore a smug, triumphant arrogance.
Mrs. Hayes, the notice was posted downstairs last week. Why haven't you people moved out yet?
Greg shouted. Leo ran out of the bedroom and hid behind Alara.
This is our home. We still have 6 months left on our lease.
Alara said, her voice tight as she shielded Leo.
Lease?
Greg sounded as if he'd heard the biggest joke in the world. He pulled a piece of paper with a gold embossed logo from his briefcase and slammed it right against Alara's chest. The paper fell to the floor.
Open those old, far-sighted eyes of yours and take a good look. This building has been acquired by the Sterling Group. As the demolition agent for this district, I am now formally notifying you of your mandatory eviction.
The moment I heard the word Sterling Group, my brain buzzed. Greg strutted arrogantly around the living room. He kicked over the small plastic bucket Leo had placed in the corner to hold his paintbrushes. The brushes scattered across the floor. Leo let out a gasp and crouched down to pick them up. Greg looked down at him from above and deliberately took a step forward. Crack! Leo's brand new glasses, which he'd just gotten, were crushed under the sole of Greg's leather shoe. The sound of shattering glass echoed harshly through the cramped living room.
Oops, my bad.
Greg shrugged insincerely.
But since you're about to be sleeping on the streets anyway, seeing too clearly would just be painful. That's the bottom line. Get it?
He turned his head and finally noticed me sitting at the dining table.
Hey, isn't this the broke old guy from the library?
Greg pointed his finger at my nose.
What, here to do some charity work, or are you a tenant here too?
He took a couple of steps closer, eyeing me with contempt.
Old man, don't say I didn't warn you. Once Sterling Group sets its sights on a piece of land, even God himself wouldn't stand a chance. If you know what's good for you, get out of here with them.
I slowly stood up. My gaze passed over Greg and landed on the compulsory demolition order lying on the floor. That familiar corporate logo one I had personally designed now felt like a resounding slap, lashing harshly across my face.
So you're telling me this is the Sterling Group's decision?
I looked at Greg, my voice uncharacteristically calm. Chapter 5.
Of course.
Greg lifted his chin, his face brimming with impatience.
It's right there in black and white. What, are you illiterate?
I ignored his ranting. I walked around the dining table to Leo's side and slowly knelt down. I reached out and picked up the pair of black-framed glasses crushed beneath Greg's leather shoes. The lenses were completely shattered, and the frames were twisted and warped. Leo wasn't crying. He just looked at me with eyes that had grown blurry once more.
Mr. Marcus,
He asked softly, his voice carrying a barely perceptible tremor.
can you teach me how to build a house that won't get knocked down? Because Grandma said we're going to be homeless.
It felt as though an invisible hand had clenched my heart so tightly that even my breath tasted of blood. I stood up and carefully tucked the broken glasses into my pocket. I turned to look at Greg.
You'll pay for that kick.
I said, looking him straight in the eye, enunciating every word. Greg froze for a moment, then burst into a fit of exaggerated laughter. He turned to the 2 construction workers and pointed at me.
Did you hear that? This penniless old man says he'll make me pay?
He turned back and glared at me with malice.
In this city, only Marcus Sterling can make me pay. Who do you think you are? Do you even have the right to act like a big shot here?
He jutted his finger out, jabbing forcefully at my shoulder. Just as his fingertip was about to touch me, I grabbed his wrist with a backhand grip. I didn't use force, I simply fixed him with an icy stare. Having navigated the business world for 20 years, I've faced countless opponents far more ruthless than him. When I unleashed, without reservation, the oppressive aura of someone who's long held power, Greg's laughter cut short. He tried to break free, only to find my grip as unyielding as an iron clamp.
What do you think you're doing? I'm warning you, I'm here on behalf of the developer.
He shouted, his voice a mask of bravado. I released my grip.
3 days.
I said, looking at him.
In 3 days, I'll show you exactly who I am.
I turned to face Alara.
Miss Hayes, trust me. No one will tear this building down.
Alara looked at me with a complex expression. She clearly didn't believe that a man in an ordinary jacket like me could stand up to that massive conglomerate. But I didn't explain further. I stepped out of the apartment. The cold wind blew against my face, yet it couldn't extinguish the raging fire burning in my chest. I took out my phone and dialed my chief assistant.
Notify all board members.
I ordered as I walked toward the sedan parked at the corner.
The top floor conference room at headquarters in half an hour. Anyone who dares to be absent needn't show up tomorrow.
I heard the assistant gasp on the other end of the line.
Mr. Sterling, it's 8 o'clock in the evening.
I said in half an hour.
I hung up without another word. Sitting in the car, I looked out the window at the old apartment building. The company under my name was destroying the one thing I wanted to protect. This absurd irony made me feel sick to my stomach. Half an hour later, I pushed open the door to the top floor conference room at Sterling Group headquarters. The long mahogany conference table was filled with executives and directors in suits, their faces filled with fear. They had no idea why this workaholic CEO had suddenly called this late-night meeting. I walked to the head of the table but didn't sit down. I pulled the crushed pair of glasses from my pocket and placed them gently on the polished tabletop. Then, I slammed the demolition order I'd retrieved back onto the table with a loud thud.
Can someone explain to me what this is?
My gaze swept across the room. A deathly silence fell over the conference room. Richard, the senior vice president in charge of the East District Development Project, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and stood up.
Mr. Sterling, this is part of the standard eviction procedure for the East District Urban Renewal Project.
Richard tried to defend himself with his impeccable business logic.
The profit margin on that apartment complex is extremely low. We plan to demolish it and rebuild it as a high-end commercial complex. This is fully in line with the group's strategic plan. Profit margins.
I scoffed.
So, for the sake of your profit margins, you'd hire thugs spouting bottom-line logic to stomp on an 8-year-old's glasses.
Richard froze.
Well, it's possible there was a deviation in execution by the outsourced local agent. It's just a minor issue. A minor issue?
I cut him off. I braced my hands on the table, leaned forward, and stared him down.
Do you think kicking an elderly man working in a late-night laundromat out onto the street is a minor matter?
Chapter 6. Richard's face turned pale. He clearly couldn't understand why a cold-hearted tycoon, who usually only looked at reports and numbers, would suddenly care about an old man's life or death.
Mr. Sterling.
A senior director cleared his throat, attempting to smooth things over.
While Richard's approach may have been a bit extreme from a business perspective, that plot of land does indeed hold significant development value. We can't halt the project just because of resistance from a single tenant.
I turned my head and looked at the director.
Business perspective?
I repeated those 4 words.
Why have we built so many skyscrapers in this city?
I pointed to the dazzling city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows.
Is it so that those struggling at the very bottom have not even a corner to shelter them from the wind and rain?
I sat up straight and smoothed my cuffs.
Richard.
I called his name.
Yes.
He replied, trembling.
You're fired.
I announced calmly. A collective gasp filled the conference room.
Mr. Sterling, you can't do this.
Richard was completely panicked.
I've worked for the group for 10 years. You can't fire me just because of some rude behavior by an outsourced agent. I can.
I looked at him, my eyes devoid of any pity.
Because you're not only arrogant, but also foolish. You have no idea what true wealth really is.
I turned to my chief assistant.
Immediately revoke the demolition order for that apartment building in the East District. Not only that, but set up a special fund to fully renovate the building. Cut the rent in half and extend the lease by 10 years.
But Mr. Sterling, this will cost us at least $30 million in projected profits.
The CFO couldn't help but interject.
Then deduct it from my personal account.
I said without hesitation. I picked up the shattered glasses from the desk again.
Also, look into that district agent named Greg.
My voice was as cold as ice.
I want to make sure he never finds another job in this city.
Over the next 2 days, a minor earthquake shook the Sterling Group from within. Richard's team was completely purged. The development plan for the East District project was halted entirely and put under review. As for me, I was biding my time. The morning of the 3rd day, I sat in my office, looking at the report my assistant had handed me.
Mr. Sterling, that agent named Greg took some people to Miss Hayes' apartment again this morning.
The assistant whispered.
He seems unaware of the internal changes at the group and still intends to complete the eviction before the deadline.
I closed the report and stood up.
Get the car ready.
I said, today I wasn't wearing that ordinary jacket. I had put on that $50,000 bespoke suit and slipped on that limited edition Patek Philippe. I had donned the full armor of the ruthless tycoon once more. When the black Rolls-Royce Phantom I was riding in pulled up in front of the apartment building, Greg was standing at the entrance, directing several workers as they carried items out. Alara clung desperately to the doorframe, refusing to let them in. Leo hid behind her, clutching the paint bucket tightly in his arms.
Old man, don't make me force the issue.
Greg bellowed arrogantly.
Even if you die here today, this building is going down.
Just then, the Rolls-Royce's door swung open. 4 bodyguards in black suits stepped out first, swiftly taking control of the situation. Greg froze. He looked at the imposing display, then at the luxury car with its special license plate, and the arrogance on his face instantly turned to obsequiousness. He assumed a high-ranking executive from the corporation had come to inspect the site.
Oh my, hello, sir. Hello?
Greg rushed over like a dog.
Why did such a minor matter trouble you to come in person? Rest assured, I'll clear out these holdouts right away.
I stepped out of the car. My black leather shoes made a dull thud as they hit the dusty concrete. I walked up to Greg and took off my sunglasses. Greg's smile froze on his face. His pupils dilated instantly, his mouth hanging open slightly, like a fish gasping for air.
You, uncle?
He stammered. I looked at him, a cold smile curving my lips.
Let's reintroduce ourselves.
I said, straightening my tie.
I'm Marcus Sterling.
Chapter 7. Greg's legs gave way, and he dropped straight to his knees. His cheap gray suit was covered in dust, and he looked like a heap of mud.
Mr. Sterling.
His voice trembled uncontrollably. He couldn't even form a complete sentence. His underlying logic, which he had once taken such pride in, crumbled instantly in the face of absolute power. I paid him no mind. I stepped past him toward Alara, who was still clinging desperately to the doorframe.
Miss Hayes,
I gave a slight bow, my tone gentle.
I'm terribly sorry to have startled you.
Alara looked at me, then at Greg kneeling on the floor, and finally at the black-clad bodyguards behind me. A flicker of disbelief and shock crossed her weathered eyes.
You're the one.
She opened her mouth.
Yes,
I nodded.
but I wish I were still the Marcus who reviews blueprints with Leo every Thursday.
I took an elegant velvet box from my pocket and handed it to Leo, who was hiding behind her.
Leo, open it and take a look.
Leo took the box cautiously. Inside was a brand new, extremely lightweight pair of titanium glasses, with lenses custom made based on his previous eye exam data.
This is compensation for accidentally breaking your glasses.
I said softly. Leo put on the glasses and blinked.
I can see clearly,
He looked up at me.
even more clearly than before.
I ruffled his hair.
I told you I'd teach you how to build a house that can't be knocked down.
I turned around to face Greg, who was still kneeling on the ground. The group's general counsel stepped forward and handed me a document. I tossed the document in front of Greg.
This is the indictment for your alleged violent intimidation and property damage.
I stared at him coldly.
Your agency contract has been terminated. The Sterling Group's legal team will have plenty of fun with you. I guarantee that every penny you earn for the rest of your life will go toward paying damages.
Greg wept bitterly, trying to grab my pant leg.
Mr. Sterling, I was wrong. I really didn't know it was you. Please give me one more chance.
A bodyguard stepped forward and ruthlessly dragged him away.
Get out.
I said just one word. Watching Greg's retreating figure, I felt a long-lost sense of calm, not because I'd used my power to crush a petty man, but because I'd finally used the power I possessed to protect something truly precious. That afternoon, I didn't return to the office. I stayed in that cramped apartment. Alara poured me another cup of instant coffee. This time, there was no guardedness in her eyes.
You kept us in the dark for so long.
She sighed.
If you'd known my identity sooner, you wouldn't have even poured me that coffee.
I said with a smile. Alara was silent for a moment.
So you really did it for your son.
She asked. I nodded.
I helped you, but I still don't know how to face him.
Alara looked at me, her gaze deep.
Marcus, if you can prop up a building on the verge of collapse, you can certainly mend your family. Go see him. Don't bring a check. Bring your heart.
Late at night, I drove alone and pulled up in front of my ex-wife Renee's house. I had bought this house back then, but I hadn't set foot here in 3 years. I sat in the car, staring at the window on the second floor where a faint light shone. That was Julian's room. I rested my head on the steering wheel for a long time until my hands and feet grew cold. I opened the car door, walked to the front gate, and rang the doorbell. It took a long time before the door opened. Julian stood behind it. He was in his pajamas, his hair tousled when he saw me. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes, only to be instantly replaced by indifference.
What are you doing here?
He blocked the doorway, showing no intention of letting me in.
In the middle of the night? Are you trying to fob me off with some new project again?
I looked up at the teenager who was already half a head taller than me. His features were the spitting image of Renee's. But that stubbornness and wariness were exactly like mine.
I'm not here to talk about money.
I said softly.
I'm here to apologize.
Chapter 8. Julian froze. He seemed to doubt his own ears.
What did you say?
He furrowed his brow.
I said I'm sorry.
I said, looking him straight in the eye without flinching.
I'm sorry for missing your 15th birthday. I'm sorry for not being there to meet you at the finish line when you ran in the state cross-country championship. I'm sorry for treating you like a to-do item on my list these past 3 years instead of my son.
Julian's lips trembled slightly, but he quickly clenched his jaw, trying to maintain that hard, protective shell.
What good does it do to say this now?
He sneered.
Do you think a simple "I'm sorry" can erase the past 3 years?
No,
I answered honestly.
but I have to start with this apology because I don't want to lose you again.
I stood in the cold wind, looking at him.
I recently met an 8-year-old boy.
I began slowly.
He couldn't even afford a decent pair of glasses, but he was trying his hardest to draw a big house to protect his grandmother. When I watched him, I thought of you. I realized that while I gave you the best material life, I made you feel so alone in this world.
Julian's eyes flickered. He didn't speak, but his fingers tightened around the doorknob, loosened slightly.
I don't want to force you to forgive me right away.
I took a step back.
I just want you to know that starting today, whenever you're ready, I'll always be here.
I turned to leave.
Wait,
Julian's voice came from behind me. I stopped in my tracks.
that little boy.
He paused, his tone a bit awkward.
The house he drew, did he lay a solid foundation?
I turned around and looked at him. My eyes suddenly stung.
They're still working on it.
I said with a smile.
Maybe you could take a look at it for him.
Over the next few weeks, there was no dramatic, sudden turnaround. Julian still threw barbed remarks my way. Renee still kept a polite distance from me, but I stopped running away. I stopped numbing myself with work. I started turning down weekend social engagements to attend Julian's cross-country races. Even if he didn't even glance at me, I'd stand by the finish line and hand him a bottle of water. I also kept up my weekly Thursday trips to the library. Leo's drawing skills were improving by leaps and bounds. Using the magnifying glass I'd given him, he drew increasingly complex architectural structures. One weekend in December, I drove to pick up Julian.
Where are we going?
He asked from the passenger seat, watching the streetscape recede outside the window.
To see a friend.
I said. I drove to the library. When I walked into the children's section with Julian, Leo was hunched over a table, drawing. Ella was sitting next to him, quietly reading a book.
Leo.
I called out. Leo looked up, saw me, and immediately broke into a bright smile. He pushed up the lightweight titanium glasses perched on the bridge of his nose and ran over.
Mr. Marcus!
I patted him on the shoulder, then stepped aside to let Julian through.
This is my son, Julian.
Julian stood there, looking a bit awkward. He looked at the little boy who was much shorter than him and wearing old clothes. Leo eyed Julian curiously.
Are you the big brother Mr. Marcus was talking about? The one who runs really fast?
Leo asked. Julian froze for a moment. He glanced at me, seemingly surprised that I would mention him in front of others.
Aha.
He replied gruffly.
What are you drawing?
Julian's gaze fell on the blueprints on the table.
I'm drawing a house.
Leo pulled Julian over to the table. Julian looked down at it for a moment.
You've drawn the load-bearing wall wrong here.
He said, pointing to a corner of the blueprint.
With this design, the second floor will collapse.
Really?
Leo's eyes widened.
Then how should I draw it?
Julian pulled out a chair and sat down, picking up a pencil.
Look, you need to add a diagonal brace here.
I stood a short distance away, watching these two very different children, heads close together, scribbling on the blueprint. Ella walked over to me.
The foundation's solid.
She murmured. I watched the long, absent, relaxed smile play at the corner of Julian's mouth.
Yeah.
I said, Chapter 9. Time flew by, and before we knew it, it was Christmas Eve. A heavy snowfall blanketed Chicago. The entire city was covered in a thick layer of pure white, muffling all the noise and mud. I didn't go back to that empty penthouse. I was driving with Julian in the passenger seat. A huge, beautifully wrapped box sat on his lap.
Are you sure they'll like this?
Julian watched the snowflakes falling outside the window, a hint of nervousness in his voice that he didn't even notice himself.
You picked out this architectural model kit yourself.
I said with a smile.
Leo is going to be over the moon.
The car pulled up in front of Alera's apartment building. Scaffolding had already been erected on the building's exterior. The Sterling Group's renovation project was underway. The place would soon be completely transformed. But the rent wouldn't go up a single penny. Julian and I trudged through the snow and climbed the stairs. We rang the doorbell. The door opened quickly. Leo, wearing a red sweater, burst out like a little cannonball.
Mr. Marcus! Big brother Julian!
He cheered, pulling us inside. The apartment was filled with the scent of baked apples and cinnamon. A small Christmas tree, decorated with old ribbons, stood in the corner, glowing with a warm light. Ella came out of the kitchen carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa.
Come on in, you must be freezing out there.
She said with a smile. Julian handed the huge cardboard box to Leo.
It's for you, Merry Christmas.
He said, trying to keep a straight face though his ears were turning a little red. Leo couldn't wait to tear open the wrapping. When he saw the incredibly intricate professional architectural model kit, his eyes shone as brightly as the stars in the sky.
Thank you, Julian.
He turned his head and looked at me.
Mr. Marcus, I have a present for you too.
He ran to the bedroom and brought out a scroll tied with a red ribbon. He held the scroll in both hands and handed it to me with great solemnity.
This is the longest I've ever spent drawing a picture.
I took it, untied the ribbon, and slowly unrolled it. Julian came over to take a look. On the paper, there wasn't a skyscraper reaching into the clouds, nor was there a structurally complex Gothic cathedral. It was a small house glowing with warm yellow light. The details in the picture were incredibly rich. 4 people stood in front of the house's windows. A little boy wearing glasses, an elderly woman with silver hair, a tall man, and a teenager who looked a bit cool. The 4 of us standing inside the same house. In the lower right corner of the painting, a line of text was written in neat handwriting. To Mr. Marcus, who helped me see the world clearly. I stared at the painting, my vision gradually blurring. I used to think that possessing the power to reshape the city's skyline meant possessing the whole world. I used to think that money could solve every problem, including mending a broken heart. But I was wrong. I turned my head to look at Julian, who was discussing model assembly with Leo. I looked at Alera, who was smiling as she handed us hot cocoa. I felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything I'd ever known. Chapter 10.
This actually looks pretty spot on.
Julian said, pointing to his likeness in the painting, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
Except you made me a little too short.
Because you're still growing.
Leo retorted confidently. The 2 boys burst into laughter. I carried the hot cocoa over to the window. Outside, the snow was still falling. This city still had countless corners, and countless souls as arrogant as the Greg of the past. But I knew I was no longer that cold-hearted tycoon who only looked down from the clouds.
What are you thinking about?
Alera walked over to me.
I'm thinking about that afternoon.
I said softly.
If that day I hadn't stopped at the library, if I'd walked straight downstairs to face those flashbulbs, what would have happened then?
Alera gazed at the snowy scene outside the window.
Then you'd just be a very rich poor man.
She said calmly. I smiled. Yes, true wealth has never been those cold numbers in a bank account. True wealth is the moment, in a corner where no one is watching, when you're willing to stop for another person. It's because you didn't turn away that you found the soul you'd lost.
Dad.
Julian's voice came from behind me. I turned around.
The blueprints for this model are too complicated. Come take a look at how to assemble this load-bearing wall.
He held a part in his hand and looked at me. He called me Dad for the first time in 3 years. My heart skipped a beat, and the warmth in my eyes finally couldn't hold back any longer. I didn't wipe them away. I strode over and sat down beside him.
Okay,
I said.
let's build it together.
The room was filled with warm yellow light. On this winter night, we finally built a house that could never be torn down. It wasn't a big house, but it was big enough to hold all our love and redemption.